Glasses clinked, applause thundered, and the brass band blared. Suddenly, a chair screeched back. Officer Angela Carter stormed toward the stage. Her fist slammed the podium. Papers flew like startled birds. Gasps echoed as she yanked out her steel cuffs and snapped them onto the wrists of her own superior. The metallic click cut through the music like a gunshot. Cameras flashed wildly, officers froze, and the entire board leapt to their feet in panic. Why would she shatter the night's celebration in such a shocking way? And what devastating truth was she ready to unleash? If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on Justice Voice and turn on the notification bell. That way, every thrilling and surprising story will always reach you. The Cleveland Public Auditorium glowed like a jewel that December evening in 2004. Outside, the Ohio wind howled down Euclid Avenue, carrying with it the sharp bite of winter, but inside the great hall the air shimmered with warmth and celebration. Chandeliers hung high above the vaulted ceiling, scattering golden light across rows of polished uniforms and evening gowns. Brass buttons gleamed, shoes clicked crisply against the marble floor. There was music, there was laughter, and there was the unmistakable pride of a city honoring its guardians. The annual Police Honors Gala was, for many, the highlight of the department's social calendar. Officers who had spent years on the beat finally had a night where their sacrifices were recognized. Families gathered at round tables draped in white cloth, watching their loved ones step into the spotlight. The smell of roast beef and garlic potatoes drifted from the banquet line, mixing with the sweet aroma of champagne being poured into tall glasses. For a brief evening, the burdens of patrol cars and late-night calls were left behind. Tonight was about tradition, unity, and recognition. City officials were in attendance too. The mayor sat near the front, flanked by donors and business leaders whose names were etched into downtown buildings. Cameras from the local news station hovered at the edges of the stage, ready to capture every handshake and every smile. At the center of it all was the police command staff, men in decorated dress uniforms whose careers had spanned decades. They stood beneath the spotlight like statues of authority, their medals glinting each time the light caught them just so. Lieutenant Maya Thompson sat several rows back, her posture straight, her hands folded carefully in her lap. To anyone glancing her way, she looked like any other officer attending the gala, proud, perhaps a little solemn, taking in the grandeur of the evening. But behind her calm expression ran currents deeper than anyone could see. Her eyes moved from face to face on the stage, pausing on Deputy Chief Richard Hale as he shook hands with the mayor and accepted the applause of the crowd. His smile was wide, confident, the kind of smile that told the city he was a man to be trusted. The orchestra swelled, striking up a familiar anthem, and the audience rose to their feet in applause. Toasts were made. Speeches began. A commander recounted the bravery of officers who had gone above and beyond in the line of duty. Photographs flashed across a large screen scenes of rescues, parades, community events. Pride filled the room, and for a moment the applause felt endless, a tidal wave of affirmation for those who wore the badge. But pride was not all that stirred within Maya. She felt the weight of memory pressing on her shoulders, a memory of a voice that no longer could be heard. Captain Eleanor Briggs, her mentor and guide, had once stood at similar ceremonies, her laugh echoing across precinct hallways, her hand firm on Maya's shoulder when she spoke of honor and truth. A year ago, Eleanor's life had ended abruptly in a car crash, one that never sat right with Maya. Eleanor had been carrying a file the day she died, a file she never had the chance to deliver. Since then, Maya had carried her mentor's unfinished fight like a secret flame. Tonight, she had decided, was the night that flame would burn in public view. Still, in these early moments of the evening, no one suspected anything unusual. Officers clinked glasses, families took photographs, and Richard Hale leaned easily against the podium, as though it had been built for him alone. He was the evening star, the figure everyone expected to honor. He spoke smoothly, thanking the mayor, praising his fellow officers, and calling the department a family that stands stronger together than apart. His words drew nods and smiles, but to Maya they rang hollow. She had seen the documents, the forged signatures, the unexplained bank transfers. She had read the emails linking Hale to contracts that reeked of corruption. Behind the polished words stood a man who had sold pieces of the department's soul. Maya's hand brushed against the small black case inside her jacket pocket. She could feel the hard edges of the USB drive, the weight of the papers folded neatly beside it. Every page represented a choice: to remain silent, to protect her career, to pretend that loyalty to the department meant loyalty to its leaders, or to speak, and in speaking risk everything. The decision had already been made in the quiet hours of her apartment, when the memory of Eleanor Briggs's conviction returned to her again and again. Justice was not an ideal to admire from afar. Justice required action, and sometimes sacrifice. The applause faded as Richard Hale prepared to introduce the next honoree. The stage lights brightened, casting his figure in a golden glow. Cameras leaned closer. Families at their tables turned expectantly. It was, by all appearances, a perfect night for celebration. No one yet knew that perfection was about to shatter. Maya took a slow breath, steadying her heartbeat. Outside, snow flurries brushed against the tall windows of the auditorium, tiny sparks against the darkness of the Cleveland night. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere deep within her, she could almost hear Eleanor's voice again, urging her forward, reminding her of the oath she had sworn: to protect and to serve, not power, not corruption, but the truth. And so she waited, hands still folded, her gaze never leaving Hale. The night was young, the speeches were many, but the moment was coming. In the glow of chandeliers and the swell of music, Lieutenant Maya Thompson prepared to step into history. The grandeur of the evening continued to unfold as though nothing in the world could disturb its rhythm. The orchestra transitioned to softer melodies now, violins weaving through the chatter of the crowd. Silverware clinked gently against plates. Waiters in crisp white shirts moved between the tables with practiced ease, refilling wine glasses, offering trays of hors d'oeuvres that disappeared almost as quickly as they were presented. For many in attendance, the gala felt like a sanctuary, a reprieve from the grim realities of patrol work or the worries of civilian life. At one table near the back, a retired officer with hair gone nearly white leaned toward his wife and whispered, "They never did things like this when I was in uniform." His wife smiled, proud, watching their son, a young patrolman, laugh with colleagues. Around them, the room buzzed with the warmth of camaraderie. It was a night built to affirm trust in the institution, to convince the city that its guardians were united, noble, and strong. Deputy Chief Richard Hale embodied that image perfectly. Every movement, every word from him reinforced a narrative of loyalty and integrity. He shook hands with families of fallen officers, kneeling briefly to speak with children who looked at him with awe. To the outside eye, Hale was more than a leader. He was a symbol of continuity, the kind of man who could steady the ship through turbulent waters. The applause that followed him was not merely polite, it was genuine. People wanted to believe in him, and most of them did. Maya could feel the weight of that belief pressing on her as she sat among her fellow officers. Conversations drifted around her, stories of arrests gone right, jokes about late-night coffee runs, whispers about promotions. The kind of talk that happened when people let their guard down. Her colleagues weren't villains. They were men and women who had chosen service over comfort, who put on the uniform every day not knowing what the shift would bring. For them, tonight was a celebration of endurance and sacrifice. For them, Richard Hale was the figure who represented their pride. That was what made Maya's task so heavy. When the truth came out, and it would, these same officers would feel betrayed. Some would hate her for it. Others would refuse to believe the evidence even when it lay before them in black and white. She could already imagine the rumors that would spread through the precincts. That she had turned against her own, that she had made the department a laughingstock. And yet, silence was not an option. Across the room, she caught sight of Sergeant Luis Ortega. He was standing near the buffet line, a plate in one hand, but his eyes met hers briefly before sliding away. He had always been careful. Even here, surrounded by laughter and music, he kept the distance that protected them both. No one would guess that it was Ortega who had slipped her the key financial documents weeks ago, the records that proved the existence of a slush fund masquerading as community outreach. Maya remembered the night he had handed them over. They had met at a diner off East 9th Street, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since the 90s. Ortega had slid into the booth across from her, ordered coffee, and said nothing until the waitress was gone. Then he had pulled a manila envelope from his jacket. I shouldn't be doing this, he had muttered. But if you're serious, if you're really serious about taking this on, you'll need more than suspicions. Maya had taken the envelope, her hands steady though her heart pounded. What about you? I'll deny everything, Ortega had said. For my wife, for my kids, I'll deny it all. But if you can do something with this, then maybe it'll mean Eleanor didn't die for nothing. Now, at the gala, he looked like any other officer enjoying a rare night of celebration. But Maya knew the truth. Beneath his calm exterior was a man who had gambled his career, maybe even his safety, on her decision to act. She turned her attention back to the stage. Hale was speaking again, his voice warm, practiced, carrying easily through the hall. This department is more than badges and uniforms, he declared. It is a family, and tonight we honor not just the bravery of individuals but the bond that holds us together. Oh, applause rose once more, a sea of hands clapping in unison. Maya joined in, her palms striking together with the same rhythm as those around her, though the sound felt hollow in her ears. She knew what Hale had done. She knew the contracts funneled through shell companies, the money that vanished into consulting fees, the suspicious connections to dockside businesses that everyone else assumed were legitimate. And she knew that the same man now basking in applause would not hesitate to sacrifice anyone who threatened his empire. The irony was sharp. The very night meant to honor unity would soon become the night that unity cracked wide open. At another table, a woman adjusted the strap of her evening gown and leaned closer to a companion. He's remarkable, isn't he? Hale has such presence. He should run for mayor someday. Her companion nodded. He's the kind of leader people trust. You can see it. Maya's jaw tightened. Trust was the currency Hale spent most freely. He thrived on it, built his power on it. And when trust collapsed, it wouldn't just collapse on him, it would shake the entire foundation of the department. Near the stage, cameras from Channel 6 maneuvered for better angles. One of the reporters, a sharp-eyed woman with auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, adjusted her microphone and spoke quietly to her cameraman. Maya recognized her. Nora Bennett. Nora had a reputation in Cleveland for cutting through official statements, for asking questions that made city leaders squirm. If anyone would understand the weight of what was about to happen, it was Nora. But Nora, too, had no idea what was coming. She was here for sound bites and photographs, not scandal. The orchestra shifted again, striking up a jaunty tune as another award was announced. Officers rose to receive plaques, the crowd applauding warmly. The night flowed seamlessly, each moment carefully choreographed, each word rehearsed. To the eyes of nearly everyone present, it was the perfect celebration of a proud institution. And perhaps that was the cruelest part, how convincing it all seemed. How easy it would have been to sit back, enjoy the food, laugh at the speeches, and believe that the department was as noble as it claimed. Maya glanced down at her watch. Her pulse quickened. She thought of her father then, a man who had once worn the same uniform with pride. Years ago, he had resigned rather than sign a false report that would have protected a superior officer. The badge means nothing if the truth means nothing, he had told her. His sacrifice had left scars on their family, but it had also carved into Maya a certainty she could never shake. Now, as laughter echoed across the hall, she felt her father's words as keenly as if he were sitting beside her. The badge meant nothing without truth. And tonight, truth waited just beyond the applause. She lifted her eyes once more to the stage, where Richard Hale stood bathed in light, and tightened her grip on the folder concealed inside her jacket. The room believed it was safe. The room believed it was united. The room believed this was only a night of pride. But belief, Maya knew, was about to collide with reality. The evening had unfolded with such flawless rhythm that no one expected it to falter. Speeches blended into applause, applause into music, music into chatter. The chandeliers gleamed, the glasses sparkled, and the orchestra played on as though the night itself had been rehearsed 100 times. Every gesture from the stage reinforced the illusion of unity and trust. But illusions have a way of breaking at the quietest sound. It was not loud, at least not at first. A small metallic click, sharp against the swell of strings from the orchestra. It came from somewhere within the audience, so subtle that a few thought they imagined it. But Maya heard it clearly, the sound of her own hands squeezing the release of her handcuffs, the familiar click of steel preparing to lock. To her it was deafening, a bell tolling in her chest. Several officers nearby glanced around, puzzled, but the music covered the sound quickly. Still, Maya rose to her feet. The movement alone shifted the air. Her chair slid back, its legs scraping faintly against the polished floor, and a hush rippled through the nearby tables. People looked up. She began to walk. At first, no one understood. An officer leaving her seat was not unusual at a long gala, but there was something in Maya's stride that cut through the complacency. Purposeful, unwavering. Eyes forward, shoulders squared, each step falling with the measured certainty of a soldier advancing toward battle. Luis Ortega, across the room, froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. His gaze followed her, and though his face betrayed nothing, his grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. He knew what was coming. He had feared it and prayed for it in equal measure. The orchestra played on, oblivious. Hale was still speaking at the podium, telling a story about a young officer who had rescued children from a burning house. The crowd listened warmly, unaware that the narrative of heroism was about to be torn apart. Maya reached the central aisle. Her boots struck the floor with a rhythm that seemed to grow louder, overpowering even the music. Heads turned, conversations stilled. A murmur passed through the audience, confusion first, then unease. Nora Bennett, standing with her cameraman near the front, instinctively raised her microphone. She couldn't explain why, but years of reporting had taught her to sense the tremor before the earthquake. Her cameraman adjusted the lens, catching sight of Maya's determined figure moving toward the stage. Hale paused in his speech, noticing the movement. He smiled, thinking perhaps Maya was approaching to assist with some presentation. "Lieutenant," he greeted warmly, voice carrying across the microphone. But Maya did not smile. She did not nod. She kept walking, her eyes locked on him. And then it came the second sound, the one that silenced everything. The metallic snap of steel as Maya swung the handcuffs open, holding them visible in her right hand. The microphone caught it, magnifying the click through the speakers. The orchestra faltered, bows dragging uncertainly across strings before dying into silence. The hall froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, bewildered. Some thought it was a demonstration, part of the ceremony. Others knew instantly it was not. The atmosphere, moments before filled with laughter, now seemed brittle, every breath drawn cautiously. Maya mounted the steps to the stage. Each footfall echoed, louder than it should have been, as though the building itself amplified her presence. Hale shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, voice still polished but edged now with a question. "What are you—" She reached him in 3 strides. Before anyone could react, Maya's hand gripped his wrist, twisting it behind his back with precise, practiced force. Hale gasped, his composure cracking as she pressed him forward against the podium. The microphone squealed briefly with feedback. The third sound rang out then, the metallic slam of the handcuffs locking into place around his wrist. Steel against steel, echoing through the silence. The audience gasped as one, a collective intake of breath. Chairs scraped, forks clattered, whispers surged. On stage, commanders lurched from their seats, shock etched across their faces. Nora Bennett's cameraman captured every second, the red light blinking steadily as history unfolded. Nora herself felt her pulse leap. This was no stunt. This was an arrest. Maya's voice cut through the chaos, steady and fierce. "Deputy Chief Richard Hale," she declared, "you are under arrest." For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the hall itself had turned to stone. And then the uproar began. Shouts erupted from the audience. Some officers surged forward instinctively, only to hesitate as they registered the clarity in Maya's stance, the authority in her words. Others muttered in disbelief, their loyalty clashing with the evidence of their eyes. Families clutched each other, unsure whether they were witnessing a tragedy or a miracle. Hale struggled, his face contorted with fury and shock. "This is outrageous," he barked, his voice raw now, stripped of its polish. "You'll regret this, Thompson. Do you know what you're doing?" Maya tightened her grip on him, her expression like steel. Her free hand reached inside her jacket, pulling out the thick folder she had carried all evening. Papers rustled audibly as she held them high, visible to all. "This," she shouted, her voice carrying over the uproar, "is what I am doing." Pages spilled from the folder, fluttering into the air like snow. They drifted across the stage, down the steps, into the audience. Officers bent to pick them up, reading lines of numbers, signatures, contracts. Murmurs grew louder as the words became clear. Forged authorizations, inflated invoices, unexplained transfers. Evidence undeniable. Nora Bennett's cameraman zoomed in on a page that landed near the podium. The words, "Consulting contract approved by Deputy Chief R. Hale," bold across the top. The illusion shattered. Maya's eyes scanned the audience. She saw disbelief, rage, fear, but also something else. In some faces she caught a glimmer of recognition, as if the truth had been suspected all along but never dared spoken. Her thoughts flickered briefly to Eleanor Briggs. She could almost hear Eleanor's voice, urging her on. "Stand tall, Maya. Truth doesn't whisper. It roars." And so she stood taller, her grip unyielding on Hale, the papers falling like judgment around them. "This department does not belong to corruption," she declared. "This city will not be deceived any longer." The roar of the crowd surged again, some in support, some in fury, but none in indifference. The night of celebration had become the night of reckoning. The storm had broken. Papers swirled across the auditorium floor, catching in the currents of the heating vents, spiraling like pale leaves in an unexpected gale. Some landed in the hands of stunned officers. Others drifted across the polished stage, settling against polished shoes and dress hems. The air that only moments earlier had rung with polite applause was now fractured by shouts, gasps, and the rising clamor of disbelief. Maya stood at the center of it all, her grip firm on Richard Hale's arm, her chest rising with controlled breath. Her voice, steady as stone, filled the silence between outbursts. "Tonight," she declared, "justice no longer bends to the will of those who hide behind rank and ceremony. Tonight the truth belongs to this city." The microphone carried her words, broadcasting them not only to the audience but through the cameras positioned around the hall. Viewers across Cleveland, tuned in for a simple segment on the annual Gala, now leaned forward in their living rooms as chaos erupted live on their screens. Nora Bennett had signaled her cameraman to keep rolling, her instincts sharp. She spoke softly into her microphone, her voice trembling with urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing now is unprecedented. A police lieutenant has just placed Deputy Chief Richard Hale under arrest during the annual Police Honors Gala. Documents are being revealed, allegations of corruption. This could change everything." The audience, hundreds strong, shifted uneasily. Some rose from their seats, craning their necks to see the documents. Others called out in protest, their loyalty to Hale unshaken. One man shouted, "This is disgraceful," while another yelled, "Let her speak." The cacophony wove into a tapestry of division. On stage, Commander Paul Whitaker had taken a step forward, his face flushed crimson. "Lieutenant Thompson," he barked, his voice sharp with command. "Stand down this instant, you're out of line." Maya turned her gaze toward him, unflinching. "Am I out of line, Commander? Or is it this department that has lost its line between honor and corruption?" Her words struck like a slap. Whitaker hesitated, his anger warring with the sudden awareness of the cameras fixed upon him. Every move now would be judged not in a closed office, but in the court of public opinion. Maya raised the folder high again, letting more papers scatter. "These," she shouted, "are not rumors. They are contracts approved under Hale's signature contracts that funneled public money into shell companies tied to organized crime at the Lake Erie docks. These are forged authorizations for equipment purchases never made. Invoices inflated threefold. This," she shook the folder, "is the truth that Eleanor Briggs died trying to deliver." The mention of Eleanor's name sliced through Maya's composure. For an instant, her throat tightened, and the weight of memory pressed against her ribs. She saw again the funeral last winter, the flag folded neatly into her trembling hands, the unanswered questions in every hushed conversation. But she steadied herself, drawing strength from the memory rather than breaking under it. Hale, his face contorted with rage, spat his denial into the microphone. "Lies, every word of it. She's fabricating, grasping for attention, nothing more." He struggled against her hold, his polished image crumbling before the audience's eyes. But the audience was no longer blind. Officers bent over the scattered papers, reading lines aloud. Look at this company address, doesn't even exist. Another pointed to a forged signature, comparing it to the real one on his badge. Murmurs of doubt began to ripple wider, seeds of betrayal sprouting where pride had stood. Luis Ortega remained in his seat, his jaw clenched, sweat gathering at his temple. He could feel the tide turning and prayed silently that the risk he had taken would not consume them both. Nora Bennett pushed closer to the stage, her microphone lifted. Lieutenant Thompson, can you confirm the origin of these documents? Who else is involved? Maya's eyes locked on the reporter. These documents were gathered from within this department. They reveal not just Richard Hale, but a network of complicity leaders who chose silence, who turned loyalty into currency. The people of Cleveland deserve to know that their trust has been sold. The uproar deepened. Some officers shouted for her to stop. Others demanded that the mayor intervene. The mayor himself sat frozen, his face drained of color, his political future unraveling before him. Maya pressed on, her voice rising above the chaos. You call this a family, she said, gesturing to the rows of uniforms. But what family hides its rot behind medals and speeches? What family sacrifices its own so a few can profit? This department can no longer afford silence. The words reverberated through the hall. Silence fell again, heavy and sharp. For the first time in years, the narrative of untouchable honor cracked, and the crowd stared at the pieces. Then, a voice broke the stillness. It was a young officer near the back, his uniform crisp, his eyes wide. Is it true? He called out, his tone wavering between fear and anger. Lieutenant, is it all true? Maya met his gaze, her own steady. It is true. Every page. And the longer we deny it, the more it grows. Hale roared, straining against her hold, but the cuffs bit into his wrist. His voice was no longer commanding, only desperate. This is a stunt. You'll destroy this department. Hem. But in the faces around the hall, Maya saw something shifting. Doubt. Reflection. The realization that destruction had already begun long before she stepped on that stage. Her chest rose as she drew breath for the words she knew would define the night. Justice, Maya said, her voice calm yet unyielding, does not belong to the powerful. It does not belong to the highest bidder. It belongs to the people. Tonight, it is theirs again. The declaration hung in the air, stark and final. Then the room erupted not in polite applause, but in a roar of voices, some cheering, some condemning, all alive with the recognition that the ground beneath them had shifted forever. And outside, in living rooms across Cleveland, citizens watched in stunned silence as the foundation of their trust trembled live on television. The stage had become a battlefield, and the audience its unwilling witnesses. Maya stood like a sentinel beside Hale, the steel cuffs clamped around his wrist, a visible reminder that the old order had been breached. But it was not only Hale who looked exposed. As the papers continued to drift across the floor, the rest of the command staff reacted in a spectrum of panic that told its own story. Commander Paul Whitaker had risen from his chair, his fists clenched at his sides, face burning with outrage. He took one step forward, then another, as if ready to rip the folder from Maya's hands, but the presence of the cameras stopped him cold. He knew what it would look like, an officer trying to silence a colleague in front of half the city. His jaw worked furiously as he ground his teeth, trapped between rage and restraint. Beside him, another official assistant chief, Vernon Price, had gone pale as parchment. He dabbed at his forehead with a trembling handkerchief, his lips moving soundlessly. The sight of specific contracts bearing his own initials scattered on the stage floor had drained him of all pretense. He seemed to shrink inside his uniform, a man suddenly stripped of the authority that once shielded him. Others fidgeted, their eyes darting toward the exits. A deputy commissioner leaned toward the mayor, whispering urgently, as though hoping the city's political leader might somehow undo the moment. The mayor himself looked stricken, torn between condemning Maya and protecting his own reputation. One of the older captains, his chest heavy with medals, lurched from his chair as if to leave. He moved toward the side aisle, but the audience noticed. A murmur rose, a wave of suspicion that made him freeze mid-step. All around him, eyes followed, and he realized too late that leaving now would be as damning as any evidence on paper. Slowly, stiffly, he lowered himself back into his chair, but the damage was done. The cameras had caught him. The room's division deepened. Some officers shouted their loyalty to Hale, calling Maya a traitor. Others, younger, less entrenched in the hierarchy, stared at the documents in their hands with growing horror. A few clapped cautiously, only to be drowned out by boos. Families in the crowd whispered anxiously, torn between pride in their loved ones and disbelief at what they were seeing. Nora Bennett, standing at the foot of the stage, was nearly breathless as she spoke into her microphone. The command staff appears divided. Some officials look shaken, others furious. The crowd itself is split. What we are seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is the unraveling of trust in real time. Through it all, Maya remained unyielding. Her heart pounded, but her face betrayed no fear. She knew this was the most dangerous moment. It was one thing to expose Hale, but now the net widened. Everyone implicated would fight, not just for their careers, but for their freedom. And then, a new figure stepped into the chaos. Captain Caleb Morris of Internal Affairs emerged from the shadows of the side stage, his uniform immaculate, his stride deliberate. He carried himself like a man entering a courtroom rather than a gala. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the audience before fixing on Maya. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, his voice amplified by the still live microphones, "I am ordering you to relinquish those documents immediately. This matter will be handled through proper channels." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some nodded eagerly, relieved to hear a tone of authority. Others muttered darkly, sensing the maneuver for what it was, a bid to contain the scandal before it spread further. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. "Proper channels?" she shot back. "You mean the same channels that buried Eleanor Briggs's investigation? The same channels that kept these contracts hidden while this department rotted from the inside?" The name struck like a blow. Several in the audience stiffened at the mention of Briggs, the respected captain whose death still hung in the air as an unresolved wound. Morris's face tightened, but his voice remained smooth. "You are out of your depth, Lieutenant. Internal Affairs exists to ensure accountability. Hand me the evidence, and I will see to it personally." Luis Ortega, still seated in the audience, muttered under his breath, "Yeah, straight into the shredder." He wasn't alone. The officers nearest him exchanged uneasy glances. Maya lifted the USB drive from her pocket, holding it aloft so the cameras could capture the small glint of metal. This drive contains records, emails, transfers, contracts that link Hale and his allies to organized crime. "If I hand it over to you, Captain, it will vanish like every other file that threatened your friends. Tonight, it will not vanish. Tonight, the people of Cleveland will see what's been hidden." The crowd roared, half in approval, half in fury. Morris's composure faltered, his mask of professionalism cracking as he realized control was slipping from his grasp. On stage, Hale snarled, his voice raw. "She's lying. All of it. She'll destroy us all if you let her." But even as he spoke, the evidence on the floor spoke louder. An officer near the front rose to his feet, holding up a contract page. "This signature's a fake. I've seen the real thing, this isn't it." Another shouted, "These invoices don't add up. Look at the dates." The tide was shifting. What had begun as disbelief was hardening into conviction. The documents were too many, the details too specific to dismiss. For a brief moment, silence fell again, a silence more dangerous than noise. The audience, the officers, the families all held their breath, waiting to see which side would seize control. Maya raised her voice once more, steady and unwavering. "You can call me insubordinate, you can strip me of rank, but you will not strip this city of the truth. Not tonight." The hall erupted, the division now undeniable. Some rose to their feet in applause, others shouted her down, the sound colliding in a thunderous storm. But one thing was certain, the night was no longer Hale's, nor Morris's, nor the command staff's. It was Maya's and the truth's. The cameras never blinked. Even as chaos spread across the stage, and the audience roared with divided voices, the red lights on the television cameras glowed steadily, capturing every second. What had begun as routine coverage of a ceremonial gala had become a spectacle that no one could have scripted. Nora Bennett held her microphone firmly, her voice sharp with urgency. "For those of you just joining us," she said, her tone pitched to cut through the noise, "Lieutenant Maya Thompson has just placed Deputy Chief Richard Hale under arrest during the annual Police Honors Gala. She has presented documents alleging corruption at the highest levels of the Cleveland Police Department. This is happening live, and the fallout could be extraordinary. Her cameraman zoomed in, panning across the scattered documents, the pale faces of command staff, the furious figure of Hale straining against his cuffs. Every frame transmitted to living rooms, bars, and late-night diners across Cleveland, a city suddenly gripped by the spectacle of its guardians tearing apart their own. In a modest house on the west side, a family watching the gala as background noise sat bolt upright. The father, a steelworker, turned up the volume, his beer forgotten on the table. "That's the deputy chief," he muttered, disbelief etched into his features. "They've cuffed the damn deputy chief." Across town in a corner tavern, conversations halted as the television above the bar shifted from routine speeches to the chaos on stage. A man set down his pool cue, staring open-mouthed. "Holy hell," he whispered. "This is going to blow the lid off the whole department." Huh. Phone lines at Channel 6 lit up almost instantly. Viewers called in, some in outrage, others in support. One woman's voice shook with anger. "She's humiliating the city. She should be arrested herself." Another caller shouted over the line. Finally, someone had the guts to say it out loud. Good for her. The city was no longer a passive audience. It was engaged, choosing sides in real time. Back in the auditorium, Nora pressed forward, her instincts telling her this was bigger than a local scandal. She leaned toward the stage, her voice aimed at Maya. "Lieutenant, do you understand the consequences of this action? You're exposing this not just to the department, but to the entire city, the entire country." Maya met her gaze, the cameras capturing every word. "The consequences of silence are worse. The people of this city have been deceived long enough. Tonight, they see the truth with their own eyes." Her words rippled outward, magnified by the broadcast, striking living rooms and radios like stones breaking glass. The truth was no longer hidden in manila folders or whispered conversations, it was public, undeniable. In the control room of Channel 6, producers scrambled. "Patch it to the network feed," one shouted. "This is national now." Within minutes, the footage was being relayed to affiliate stations, spreading beyond Cleveland, catching the attention of anchors in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. By the end of the hour, headlines would crawl across news tickers. "Police Deputy Chief arrested during Gala live on air." On stage, the pressure mounted. The command staff, once untouchable, now looked cornered. Whitaker muttered harshly to Morris, both men realizing that any attempt to suppress the documents would only confirm guilt in the eyes of millions. The mayor leaned forward, his voice low but frantic. "We need to shut this down. Cut the cameras. Now." But the media crew wasn't his to control. Channel 6 had smelled the story of a decade, and they weren't about to relinquish it. The cameramen stayed steady, lenses fixed, red lights glowing like beacons of accountability. Maya felt the shift in the air. She had crossed the threshold. There was no retreat now. Even if she were dragged off stage, the images had already been broadcast, the words spoken, the evidence seen. Silence could no longer bury what the city had witnessed. Her hand tightened on the USB drive in her pocket. She had more than paper, she had digital proof, records that could not be denied. She imagined them flashing across television screens, printed in tomorrow's newspapers, discussed in every coffee shop and diner. The thought steadied her. Luis Ortega, still seated, exhaled a shaky breath. He had feared that the truth would vanish into a file drawer, but seeing it spill across live television filled him with a strange mixture of dread and hope. Dread for what might happen to them both. Hope that Briggs's death might finally mean something. Nora's cameraman swept the lens across the audience, capturing faces caught between disbelief and fury. A woman in the second row clutched her child's hand tightly. A young officer shook his head, torn between loyalty and conviction. Every expression told a story, and those stories were now public. Outside the auditorium, vans from other news stations screeched to a halt, reporters leaping out with cameras in hand. Word had spread through police scanners and frantic phone calls. Within minutes, the steps of the Cleveland Public Auditorium were swarming with journalists, their lights blazing against the falling snow. The city's power brokers were already on their phones. Council members demanded answers. Business leaders whispered about cutting ties. The governor's office placed a call to the mayor, demanding an explanation. The scandal was no longer confined to a single stage, it was seeping into every corridor of influence. And through it all, Maya remained at the center, calm in the storm. She could feel the eyes of the city on her, feel the weight of their judgment. But she also felt something else, a surge of liberation. For months she had carried the burden in silence, doubting whether she would have the courage to act. Now the truth was no longer hers alone to bear. It belonged to everyone. Hale thrashed again, his voice hoarse. "You fools! She's destroying us. She's destroying the whole department." His words, meant to rally, instead rang hollow, the desperation of a man watching his empire crumble. Maya leaned close enough for only him to hear. "No, Richard, you destroyed it yourself. I'm just turning on the lights." He snarled, but the cameras caught only his fury, not her whisper. The noise in the hall rose again, cheers, boos, shouts, gasps. But above it all was the constant, steady eye of the cameras, unblinking, relentless. Cleveland had been watching a celebration. Now it was watching a reckoning. And far beyond the city, the nation was beginning to watch as well. The auditorium was no longer a place of ceremony. It had become a crucible, fire licking at the edges of everything once thought unshakable. Maya stood firm. Hale restrained beside her, the scattered documents forming a paper trail of corruption across the stage. The crowd's noise ebbed and surged, torn between outrage and revelation. She could feel the tension pressing down like a storm about to break again. She raised her chin, lifted the microphone from the podium with her free hand, and let her voice cut through the clamor. "Tonight," Maya began, steady and clear, "is not just about one man in handcuffs. It is not even about one night of shame. This is the beginning of a full investigation into corruption that has infected our department for years." The words hit the crowd like thunder. Gasps, shouts, cheers. The mayor stiffened in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. Commanders exchanged frantic looks. Whitaker's hand clenched the armrest of his seat so tightly his knuckles blanched white. Maya pressed on. "For too long, justice has been twisted into a shield for the powerful." Files disappeared, whistleblowers silenced. Brave officers like Captain Eleanor Briggs paid with their lives when they tried to bring the truth forward. She paused, her throat tightening as the name left her lips. But no more. That ends tonight. She looked out into the crowd, meeting the eyes of officers she had worked alongside, men and women she respected. This is not betrayal. This is loyalty to the badge we swore to honor, loyalty to the citizens we swore to protect. If this department is truly a family, then it is time we cleaned our own house. For a moment, silence followed, heavy as stone. And then, from the back of the hall, someone clapped. Just once, sharp and deliberate, heads turned. It was a young patrol officer standing straight, his expression resolute. He clapped again. Others joined, hesitant at first, then louder. A ripple of applause spread through the younger ranks, though it was drowned quickly by angry shouts from veterans fiercely loyal to Hale. The divide was stark, visible under the harsh stage lights. Hale bellowed over the noise, his voice raw. "She's tearing this department apart. You'll regret every word." "Huh." Maya turned toward him, her gaze calm but unyielding. "No, Richard, you and your friends already tore it apart. I'm here to rebuild it." Nora Bennett, never missing a beat, addressed the camera. "Viewers, what we're witnessing now is extraordinary. Lieutenant Thompson is not only accusing her superior of corruption, she is declaring the start of a larger investigation publicly, on live television. This is a direct challenge to the highest levels of the Cleveland Police Department." Oh, outside the auditorium, the crowd of reporters swelled. News vans crowded the steps, satellite dishes rising into the snowy night sky. Microphones bristled as anchors delivered updates to national audiences. The words "beginning of an investigation" scrolled across tickers, setting social media ablaze in real time. Back inside, the mayor finally rose from his seat, his voice shaking as he tried to seize control. "Lieutenant Thompson, this is highly irregular. You cannot announce investigations without the authority of this office." Maya cut him off. "With respect, Mayor, the authority lies with the truth, and the truth is no longer yours to bury." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The mayor's face flushed crimson, but he sat down, realizing that further argument would only paint him as complicit. Maya's hand tightened around the microphone. She thought briefly of her father, of the day he had resigned rather than sign a false report. His words echoed in her mind. The badge means nothing if the truth means nothing. Tonight, she was carrying that legacy forward. Her eyes swept the room once more. This investigation will not stop with Hale. Every document, every transfer, every forged signature will be examined, and those who profited from this betrayal will answer not in private offices, not behind closed doors, but here, in the light. The audience roared again. Some officers leapt to their feet in anger, shouting curses. Others shouted back in support, their voices fierce with long-suppressed frustration. Families clung to one another, children staring wide-eyed at a department tearing itself in two. Whitaker surged forward finally, his fury barely contained. "Enough," he barked. "Lieutenant, you've made your point. Hand over the evidence or I will have you removed." But even as he spoke, the crowd's eyes shifted not to him, but to the cameras. Every gesture, every word was being recorded, broadcast, judged. Whitaker's authority meant little under the unblinking gaze of millions. He stopped short, realizing the trap. Maya's voice lowered, but the microphone carried it with force. "You can threaten me. You can strip my badge, but you cannot erase the truth. Tonight is only the first step. Tomorrow, the investigation begins." The hall erupted once more, but this time it was different. The noise wasn't only outrage, it was momentum, energy, a recognition that something irreversible had begun. Nora Bennett's closing words for the live broadcast captured it perfectly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Cleveland Police Department may never be the same. What began as a celebration has turned into a reckoning, and Lieutenant Maya Thompson has declared it only the beginning." And in that moment, beneath the blazing lights and the storm of voices, Maya felt the shift in her bones. She had crossed the line from revelation to revolution. There was no turning back. The roar of the hall had barely settled when another figure strode into the light. Captain Caleb Morris, head of internal affairs, moved with a deliberate calm that contrasted with the chaos around him. His uniform was impeccable, his tie perfectly straight, his polished shoes clicking against the stage with each step. He did not rush. He did not shout. Instead, he carried himself with the cool assurance of a man accustomed to control. To many in the audience, his presence was a relief. If anyone could restore order, it was Morris. Internal affairs was supposed to be the final line of accountability, the branch that policed the police. He raised his hands slightly, as though quieting a classroom. The noise dimmed, though the cameras never turned away. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morris began, his voice smooth, practiced, carrying across the hall. "I understand that emotions are running high, but let us remember we are officers of the law. We are not a mob." End of chapter. His eyes shifted to Maya, sharp and calculating. "Lieutenant Thompson, you have made serious allegations tonight, allegations that must be handled properly. I am ordering you, as Captain of Internal Affairs, to relinquish those documents and any digital evidence to me immediately. This department will investigate through the correct channels." A murmur spread through the audience. Some officers nodded, comforted by the appeal to procedure. Others muttered darkly, unconvinced. Maya's jaw tightened. She had expected this. "Captain Morris," she said, her voice steady, "with all due respect, I cannot hand this evidence to you. We both know where it would end up buried, like Eleanor Briggs's file before it." The name hit like a stone thrown into still water. The ripple was immediate. Officers shifted uncomfortably, remembering the captain whose sudden death had always seemed too convenient. Families exchanged whispers. Morris's smile faltered for just an instant before he regained his composure. "Lieutenant, you are treading on dangerous ground. You are accusing me of obstruction without evidence, in front of the entire city." Maya lifted the USB drive again, holding it so the cameras caught the gleam. "The evidence is here, and it's no longer confined to this room. Copies exist, already outside these walls. Even if you silence me tonight, Captain, the truth would still reach the light." "How would you?" That revelation rippled through the hall like electricity. Nora Bennett's cameraman zoomed in on the drive, the small object that now represented a turning point for the city. Morris's expression hardened. His tone sharpened, shedding its polished veneer. "You think you can dictate terms here? You've humiliated this department in front of the nation. You've broken chain of command, defied procedure, and disgraced the badge you wear." Maya stepped closer, her voice cutting through his like a blade. No, Captain. I've honored the badge. I've honored the oath we all swore to protect the people, to uphold the law. You want to talk about procedure? Where was procedure when Hale siphoned funds into shell companies? Where was procedure when Briggs tried to file her report and ended up dead on the roadside? The crowd stirred, the division widening. Some officers shouted angrily for Maya to be removed. Others shouted their agreement, their voices raw with long-suppressed frustration. Hale, still in cuffs, sneered. She's a liar, a traitor. His voice cracked, desperation leaking through. But Morris ignored Hale, keeping his gaze fixed on Maya. Enough, he said coldly. If you will not comply, then you leave me no choice. Lieutenant Maya Thompson, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. Gasps tore through the crowd. Whitaker exhaled in visible relief, as though the declaration had solved everything. Several command staff nodded, eager to see the nightmare end. But Maya did not flinch. She stood taller, her voice carrying above the uproar. You can strip my rank, you can take my badge, but you cannot take the truth from the people who have already seen it tonight. I did not come here to protect my career. I came here to honor the promise made to Eleanor Briggs, to my father, and to every honest officer who still believes in what this badge stands for. The applause that followed was uneven but fierce, a chorus of younger officers and civilians rising against the tide of boos. The cameras caught every second, every face, the battle lines drawn in public. Morris's eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his expression. He had expected submission, or at least hesitation. Instead, Maya had met his authority with unshakable conviction. Nora Bennett turned to face her camera, her voice urgent. Viewers, what you are seeing now is unprecedented. Captain Caleb Morris of Internal Affairs has attempted to seize the evidence and remove Lieutenant Thompson from duty. But Thompson has refused, insisting that the truth is already beyond suppression. This confrontation is unfolding live before our eyes. Outside the auditorium, reporters jostled for position, their questions shouted into the snowy night. Crowds of citizens gathered, some carrying signs hastily scrawled with words like justice and truth. Word had spread fast, drawing people from bars, buses, and neighborhoods, all converging on the epicenter of revelation. Inside, Morris's composure cracked further. You think public opinion will protect you, Thompson? Public opinion shifts like wind, but I have the authority, and authority will crush you. Maya's voice lowered, quiet but firm, the microphone carrying her words. Authority without truth is nothing but tyranny, and tyranny ends tonight. The hall exploded once more, cheers and shouts colliding in a storm of sound. Officers shouted at one another across rows, families clutched their loved ones, journalists scribbled furiously. And through it all, the cameras remained unblinking, immortalizing the moment when authority and truth clashed head-on. For Maya, it was clear. This was only the beginning. Morris would not stop. The forces behind Hale ran deeper than the documents revealed. The battle ahead would be long, brutal, and personal. But tonight, at least, the first blow had been struck, and the truth had drawn blood. The gala did not end so much as collapse. What had begun as a night of polished speeches and glittering chandeliers dissolved into chaos that spilled out into the snowy streets of Cleveland. By the time Maya left the stage, Hale in custody and the documents scattered across the auditorium like confetti from a ruined celebration, the city outside was already alive with noise. News vans lined the streets. Reporters shouted questions as officers tried to push back the swelling crowd. Citizens held up cell phones, recording everything, broadcasting live to social media. Word had traveled faster than anyone imagined. Maya, Lieutenant Thompson, are you a whistleblower? Do you fear for your safety? Is it true that Hale is tied to organized crime? What about the other commanders? Do you expect to be arrested yourself for insubordination? The questions came like bullets. Maya didn't answer. She kept her head high, her eyes forward, as she walked through the snow with a handful of younger officers forming an impromptu shield around her. Luis Ortega was among them, his expression grim. Inside, the command staff huddled in corners, whispering furiously. Morris was already on the phone, his voice low and tight, issuing orders that would set the counterattack in motion. Hale had been taken into custody for processing, but his allies were far from finished. The next morning, Cleveland woke to a storm louder than the blizzard outside. Headlines screamed from every newspaper stand. Deputy Chief arrested at Gala, Lieutenant exposes corruption live on air. Cable networks looped the footage endlessly. Maya's calm declaration, Hale's furious denial, papers scattering like snow. Talk radio hosts dissected every frame, callers arguing passionately. Some hailed Maya as a hero, others called her reckless, even dangerous. City Hall scrambled. The mayor held a press conference, his words measured but hollow. "We will allow internal affairs to handle this matter thoroughly," he said, avoiding Maya's name. The governor's office released a statement demanding accountability. The Justice Department quietly began making inquiries. But within the department, the mood was darker. Maya walked through the precinct like a soldier crossing hostile territory. Some officers looked away when she passed, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others muttered insults under their breath. Traitor, disgrace, showboat. Yet there were also quiet nods, fleeting moments of solidarity from those who believed but feared to speak. She entered her office to find a stack of unsigned forms dumped across her desk, a petty punishment from superiors trying to bury her in busy work. She ignored them, her focus fixed on the investigation she knew had to move forward. Luis Ortega slipped inside, closing the door quickly behind him. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "You need to be careful," he said. "Word is, Morris is building a case against you. He's calling you unstable, saying you falsified the documents yourself." Maya's stomach tightened. "He'll try to paint me as the criminal." Ortega nodded. "He already is. I heard him talking with Whitaker. They want to discredit you before the feds can step in. If they can ruin your reputation, the rest of the evidence won't matter." "How?" She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. It was exactly the kind of tactic she expected. Briggs had faced the same whispers before her death that she was paranoid, erratic, unreliable. And then the crash had ended the whispers altogether. Maya's eyes darkened. "They won't bury this the way they buried Eleanor." Ortega hesitated. "You may not have a choice if they come after you harder. I've seen the way they operate. They'll use every trick: internal memos, anonymous leaks, false reports. You could lose your badge, your pension, even your freedom." Maya's jaw set. "Then I'll fight them in the open. Better that than dying in silence." Ortega studied her for a long moment. "You're braver than me." "No," Maya said quietly, "just more stubborn." That night, Maya sat alone in her apartment, the USB drive on the table in front of her. Outside, the city hummed with tension. Snowflakes tapped against the window, melting as they touched the glass. She thought of her father, his hands trembling as he folded his uniform for the last time, the bitterness in his voice when he told her that integrity had cost him everything. The badge means nothing if the truth means nothing. She thought of Eleanor Briggs, the way the older woman had guided her through her first years on the force, the laughter they had shared over bad coffee, the determination in Eleanor's eyes the day she confided, "If I don't make it, someone has to finish this." And she thought of the faces she had seen at the Gala, officers divided, families frightened, citizens demanding answers. The weight of it pressed against her chest. Fear whispered that Morris was right, that authority would crush her. But beneath the fear burned something stronger: resolve. She picked up the USB drive, feeling its cool edges against her palm. "You won't vanish," she whispered. "Not like Eleanor, not like all the others." Meanwhile, in a private office downtown, Morris leaned back in his chair, his expression cold as he reviewed a draft report. Lieutenant Maya Thompson exhibited erratic behavior at the annual Police Honors Gala. Evidence presented was unverified and possibly fabricated. Her actions undermined the integrity of the department and endangered public trust. Recommendation: immediate suspension pending psychological evaluation. He signed the bottom with a flourish. Then he picked up the phone. "Leak it to the press," he ordered. "By morning, the city won't know whether to call her a hero or a lunatic." His allies nodded grimly. The counterattack had begun. And in the middle of it all stood Maya Thompson, caught between a city awakening to the truth and a department determined to destroy her for speaking it. The battle had only just begun. The days following the gala blurred into a storm of headlines, interviews, and rumors. Maya Thompson had become a household name overnight. Some called her a hero, others a traitor, but no one ignored her. She walked through Cleveland like a woman under both spotlight and crosshairs. Her official suspension arrived within 48 hours. The letter, stamped with the seal of Internal Affairs, accused her of insubordination, reckless conduct, and jeopardizing the reputation of the department. It recommended mandatory psychological evaluation before any return to duty. Maya read it once, then set it aside without comment. She had expected nothing less. The real work, she knew, had only just begun. At a small diner on the edge of Collinwood, Maya met Luis Ortega in the back booth. The place smelled of fried onions and stale coffee, its jukebox still broken after all these years. Snow tracked in on boots, melted into slush near the door. It was the kind of place no one paid much attention to, a perfect meeting spot. Ortega slid a folder across the table, his face tight with worry. "These are the bank transfers I didn't show at the gala. I held them back, thinking it might be safer. But after what Morris is doing, you'll need every scrap you can get." Maya opened the folder. The pages detailed wire transfers from shell companies to accounts linked to Hale and 2 other commanders. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars routed through consulting and equipment purchases that never materialized. "This ties them deeper than anyone can deny," she said. Ortega nodded. "But it also puts a bigger target on your back. They know you're not going to stop, and if they can't discredit you, they'll look for another way." Maya leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "You think they'll try to shut me up the way they shut up Eleanor?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, Maya drove home through the snow-slick streets. The city lights blurred against the windshield, the wipers squeaking in steady rhythm. She turned down her block and slowed. A black sedan was parked across from her apartment building. Its windows were tinted, its engine idling. Maya's instincts sharpened instantly. She pulled into her driveway, cut the engine, and waited. The sedan didn't move. She sat there for nearly 5 minutes, staring at the shadowed figures inside, until finally the car rolled away into the darkness. Her pulse hammered, but she forced herself to breathe. She was being watched. Inside her apartment, she locked the door and set the USB drive on the kitchen table. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "They want to scare me," she thought. "They want me to doubt myself. I won't give them that satisfaction." But even as she told herself the words, she couldn't shake the weight of the memory. Eleanor Briggs driving alone down a quiet road, headlights flaring in her rearview mirror before everything went dark. The smear campaign intensified. Local papers ran anonymous leaks, suggesting Maya had fabricated documents to settle a personal grudge. A television panel debated whether she was mentally unstable, citing her father's resignation years ago as evidence of a family history of trouble with authority. The department issued a statement calling her actions deeply regrettable and under review. Yet the public wasn't so easily swayed. Citizens rallied outside City Hall carrying signs. "Stand with Maya. Clean the department." A petition circulated demanding an independent investigation, gaining thousands of signatures within days. For every article calling her reckless, there was another painting her as courageous. The city itself was at war with its conscience. Maya watched it unfold from the sidelines, knowing that while public opinion mattered, the real battle was in the evidence. She had to gather enough to withstand the storm Morris was unleashing. Late one evening, as she pored over bank records at her kitchen table, a knock rattled her door. She froze. "Who is it?" she called. "It's Ortega." She opened the door cautiously. Ortega stepped inside, brushing snow from his jacket. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "You need to see this." He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph, grainy but clear enough, Maya leaving the diner the night before. Another shot showed her car parked outside her apartment. "They're watching you," Ortega said. "Not just casually, they're documenting your every move." Maya's grip tightened on the photo. Morris? Or someone working for him? Either way, you can't stay here. You need someplace safe. She shook her head. "If I run, they'll say I'm guilty. I'm not hiding." Ortega sighed. "Then at least don't be alone. They want you isolated. Don't give them the chance." The next morning, Maya found her car vandalized. The windshield was smashed. The words "Traitor" spray painted in red across the hood. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Others turned away, unwilling to be seen taking sides. Maya stood in the cold, staring at the damage, her fists clenched. She refused to let them see her shaken. She called a tow truck, arranged for repairs, and walked away as though nothing had happened. But inside, she knew the message was clear. This was no longer just a smear campaign. It was intimidation, plain and simple. That evening, she met with Nora Bennett in a quiet corner of a newsroom. Nora's eyes were sharp, her notepad ready. "They're trying to bury you," Nora said flatly. "But people want answers. If you go public with the rest of your evidence, everything you might turn the tide." Maya hesitated. "If I release it all now, they'll say it's stolen, inadmissible. I need it to hold up in court." "Then you're walking a razor's edge," Nora warned. "Too slow, and they'll destroy you. Too fast, and they'll dismiss you." Maya nodded. "That's why I need allies. Real ones, not just whispers in the crowd." Nora studied her for a long moment. "You may have more than you think. People are scared, yes, but they're also tired of the lies. If you keep standing, others will start standing too." That night, as Maya returned home, she caught sight of the black sedan again. It lingered at the corner, headlights off, engine silent. She walked into her building without flinching, but her mind was steel. She knew then that the battle had escalated. This was no longer about career or reputation. It was about survival. And yet, deep in her chest, beneath the fear, the resolve burned hotter than ever. "They'll come for me," she whispered into the dark. "But I'll be ready." Snow still covered the sidewalks of Cleveland when Maya decided that waiting was no longer an option. The vandalism, the surveillance, the smear campaign, it all confirmed what she already knew. She was not dealing with a handful of corrupt officers. She was fighting a network, one that reached further than she had dared to imagine. The only way forward was to expand her battlefield. She started with the people she trusted most. Sergeant Luis Ortega was first, of course. His knowledge of the department's financial operations had already proven invaluable. But now, she needed more than ledgers and signatures. She needed voices. Witnesses. People willing to put their names on the line. "Names," Maya said, sitting across from Ortega in the back of the same Collinwood diner. "We need people inside the department who have seen things, small things, even that don't add up, the kind of details Morris can't erase with a memo." Ortega hesitated, then scribbled on a napkin. "Two people might talk. Officer Dana Wells from the docks, she's seen containers come and go that never make the books. And Detective Alan Price, he's complained more than once about cases being shut down from above. But Maya," he looked up, his eyes heavy, "if they speak, they'll be marked, just like you." Maya folded the napkin carefully. "Then we make sure they're not alone." The next step took her outside the department. She met with Nora Bennett again, this time in a quiet office at the Channel 6 newsroom. The walls buzzed with the hum of equipment, the glow of monitors spilling blue light across Nora's sharp features. "You're not just chasing Hale anymore, are you?" Nora asked, leaning forward. Maya shook her head. "Hale was the front man, but the money trails don't stop with him. They lead to contracts tied to shipping companies, and those companies have political donors written all over them." Nora tapped her pen against her notebook. "You're saying this goes beyond the department. City Hall?" "City Hall," Maya confirmed, "and maybe higher." Nora let out a low whistle. "If you're right, you're not just poking the bear. You're walking into its den." Maya's expression was calm, resolute. "Then it's time to bring a bigger light." Within days, Maya had arranged clandestine meetings with both Officer Wells and Detective Price. Dana Wells was nervous, glancing over her shoulder even in the dim back room of a church where they met. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I've seen cargo containers unloaded at the docks late-night shifts. No paperwork, no records. When I asked, I was told to forget it. But I swear, I saw Hale himself down there once. Talking with men I know weren't cops." Halport. Detective Price was more bitter than afraid. "I had a case tied to a meth ring last year. We traced it back to a warehouse near the waterfront. Next thing I know, the case is reassigned, and my report disappears. Morris told me to keep my mouth shut, or I'd find myself on traffic duty." Both accounts fit neatly with the financial records Maya held. The picture was sharpening, and it was bigger than Hale, much bigger. Meanwhile, the smear campaign against her grew louder. The Cleveland Tribune ran a headline, Lieutenant Thompson unstable sources question motives. On the evening news, a panel of experts debated whether her accusations were a political stunt. But the louder the attacks grew, the more people reached out quietly. Retired officers called her anonymously, hinting at stories from years past. Civilians sent letters describing shady dealings they had witnessed, but never dared report. Bit by bit, a chorus began to form beneath the noise. Ortega noticed it too. They're trying to bury you, but instead they're making people curious. Every lie they tell makes someone wonder what they're hiding. Maya allowed herself a thin smile. Then let's give them more to wonder about. Her investigation led her to the waterfront late one night. The docks were quiet, snow piled in drifts along the piers, the lake a sheet of black ice stretching into the distance. She moved cautiously, her breath clouding in the cold air, Ortega trailing behind. They stopped near a warehouse with faded lettering. Ortega pointed to the lock on the side door. That's new. No reason for a warehouse this old to have a fresh lock. Maya's instincts flared. They waited, watching from the shadows. Around midnight, headlights appeared. A truck rolled up to the loading dock, its engine idling as three men climbed out. They carried clipboards but moved with the precision of professionals, not dock workers but smugglers. Maya's heart raced. She couldn't intervene, not without backup, not without risking exposure, but she pulled out her camera and began snapping photos. When the truck doors opened, she caught sight of crates marked with phony serial numbers, the kind she'd seen in the fake invoices. Proof. The next morning, she delivered the photos to Nora Bennett. The reporter's eyes widened as she scrolled through them. This isn't just corruption. This is organized crime, clear as day. And if Hale's men are tied to it, that means the department has been shielding traffickers. Not just shielding, Maya said grimly. Partnering. Nora nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. You realize what this means. If this story goes national, it won't just shake Cleveland. It'll shake every city watching, every department with skeletons in its closet. They'll come at you harder than ever. They already are, Maya replied. But I'm done playing defense. It's time they knew I'm not afraid. That evening, Maya appeared on live television for the first time since the gala. Sitting across from Nora, under the studio lights, she spoke directly to the camera. I know the risks of what I've done, she said, her voice calm, deliberate. I know what it means to defy powerful men and expose what they've hidden, but I also know what silence costs. Captain Eleanor Briggs tried to bring this truth forward, and she paid with her life. I will not let her sacrifice be forgotten. This is not just my fight. This is our fight for every honest officer, for every citizen who deserves a department that serves them, not itself. The interview went viral within hours. Supporters flooded social media with messages of solidarity. Crowds gathered outside City Hall chanting her name. But inside the corridors of power, Morris and his allies seethed. This woman is dangerous, Whitaker spat during a closed-door meeting. If we don't crush her now, she'll bring the whole house down. Morris's voice was low, measured. Then we will crush her, but not with fists, with silence. We'll cut her off, piece by piece, until no one listens anymore. Yet as Maya left the studio that night, she saw something that told her otherwise. People waiting outside in the snow, clapping, calling her name. Ordinary citizens, their eyes filled with something stronger than fear. Hope. And for the first time since the gala, Maya believed that hope might just be the weapon she needed most. The backlash came fast, sharper than even Maya had expected. Within a week of her television interview, headlines turned vicious. Lieutenant Thompson's evidence questioned FBI silent on allegations. Talk radio hosts mocked her, repeating Morris's narrative that she was unstable, driven by grief over Briggs. Editorials painted her as a rogue officer who had embarrassed the city. The department announced a formal investigation against her. She was accused of leaking confidential files, of misconduct, of damaging public trust. For every cheer she heard on the streets, there was a whisper of betrayal in the halls of the precinct. Luis Ortega came to her apartment late one night, his face drawn. They're building something against you, he warned. Morris has men digging through your records, your old cases. If they find even the smallest mistake, they'll twist it into a scandal. Maya sat at her table, the USB drive in front of her. Then we make sure we have something bigger, something they can't bury, no matter how hard they try. The danger wasn't only bureaucratic. One evening, as she walked to her car, she noticed the same black sedan idling across the street. She turned her keys in her hand, ready to defend herself. But before she reached her vehicle, the car sped off, its tires spitting snow. The next morning, she found her apartment door ajar. Nothing was stolen, but her files had been moved, her desk drawers rifled through. A warning, clear and cold. We can reach you whenever we want. Still, she refused to bend. Fear was what they wanted. She would not give it to them. Nora Bennett called with urgency 2 nights later. "I've been digging into the shipping companies tied to Hale," she said. "They're connected to a conglomerate out of Chicago. And guess what? That conglomerate is one of the biggest donors to the mayor's re-election campaign." Maya exhaled slowly. It was bigger than Cleveland. "Which means if I fall, the city leaders stay safe. And if I stand, the mayor falls with them." "Exactly," Nora said. "But that also means they'll come at you harder than ever. If you want to win, you'll need to outplay them." The next day, Internal Affairs summoned her. Morris himself presided, flanked by Whitaker and Price. His voice was calm, almost gentle, as he laid out the accusations. "You've violated confidentiality. You've spread unverified allegations to the press. You've brought shame upon this department. We could recommend criminal charges." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "Unless you retract, publicly, deny what you said at the gala, call it a mistake." Maya felt the room pressing in. They were offering her the easy way out. A false apology, a ruined reputation, but survival. She shook her head slowly. "I won't retract the truth. Not now, not ever." Whitaker slammed his fist against the table. "Then you'll go down alone." Maya met his fury with calm. "I won't be alone. The truth is already moving, whether you like it or not." And she was right. That night, in a safe location Nora had arranged, Maya met with 2 federal investigators. They had seen the footage of the gala. They had received anonymous tips, likely from retired officers emboldened by her stand. And now, with the files she carried and the photographs from the docks, they were ready to listen. One of them, a tall man with a clipped tone, studied her carefully. "You realize what you're doing, Lieutenant. Once this is in our hands, there's no going back." "Ho." Maya slid the folder across the table. "There was no going back the moment I put Hale in cuffs." The agent opened the file, his eyes scanning quickly. His expression gave nothing away, but Maya felt the tide shifting. For the first time since the gala, she was not just fighting to survive. She was preparing to strike back. The next morning, Morris held a press conference. He spoke with grave authority, denouncing Maya as a disgraced officer clinging to conspiracy theories. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the city's leadership nodded behind him. But as he spoke, Maya watched the broadcast from Nora's office, her lips tightening. She knew what was coming, because in her hands she held not just contracts and bank transfers, but the key and email trail directly linking Hale, Whitaker, and a political donor whose name was already circling through the press. Maya turned to Nora, her eyes blazing. "Tomorrow we release this, not just to Cleveland, to everyone." For months she had been cornered, battered by lies, haunted by fear. But as the snow fell outside and the city braced for another storm, Maya knew the tables were turning. The next strike would not be theirs. It would be hers. The storm broke on a Monday morning. At precisely 9 o'clock, Channel 6 released the files. Maya had handed over the complete set of contracts, forged signatures, bank transfers, and, most damning of all, the email trail linking Deputy Chief Hale, Commander Whitaker, and a wealthy shipping magnate who had funneled money into the mayor's re-election campaign. The emails were explicit: agreements on payoffs, orders to suppress investigations, promises of political favors. The city exploded. Phones at City Hall rang off the hook. Protesters gathered outside the precinct with signs reading "Clean the House and Justice for Briggs." National news anchors led with the story, their faces grave, as they explained how corruption had burrowed into the heart of Cleveland's police department. By noon, the mayor resigned under pressure. By evening, federal agents had taken both Whitaker and Price into custody. Hale, already in jail, faced additional charges. And Morris, captain of Internal Affairs, once so confident, was escorted from his office in handcuffs, his carefully constructed authority unraveling in full view of the cameras he had once tried to silence. Maya watched the coverage from her apartment. She sat quietly, a mug of untouched coffee in her hands, as the anchors repeated the words she had dreamed of hearing: indictments, resignations, federal investigation. Luis Ortega sat across from her, exhaustion etched into his face. "You did it," he said softly. Maya shook her head. "We did it. Briggs did it. My father did it. Everyone who refused to sign a lie, everyone who whispered the truth even when it cost them, that's who did this." For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe fully. The weight that had pressed against her chest since the gala eased, not gone, but lighter. Still, the victory was not without scars. Her suspension remained. Her career in uniform would likely never recover. Old friends in the department had turned their backs. And she knew that even as justice moved forward, the city's trust would take years to rebuild. But none of that changed what mattered most. The truth was free. That evening, Nora Bennett visited her, notebook in hand. She didn't ask questions this time. Instead, she sat quietly for a while, then said, "You know, people are calling you reckless, but more people are calling you brave. They're saying you reminded them what a badge is supposed to mean." Maya glanced at the USB drive still lying on her table, the little piece of metal that had carried so much weight. "A badge is nothing," she said quietly, "if the truth means nothing." Nora smiled faintly. "Sounds like something your father would have said." Maya nodded, her eyes misting. "He did." The snow outside had stopped by then. The streets were quiet, the city holding its breath after a storm that had shaken its foundations. Tomorrow would bring hearings, trials, endless debates about reform. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, Maya allowed herself to feel the simple truth. She had kept her promise. To Briggs, to her father, to herself. She stepped to the window, watching the snow glisten under the streetlights, and whispered into the night, "We stood up, and we didn't fall." In the weeks that followed, Cleveland began to change. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Younger officers spoke more openly about corruption. Citizens demanded transparency. And though Maya's role remained uncertain, her name had already become something larger than a rank or a title. It had become a reminder that one voice, steady and unafraid, could shatter even the most carefully built lies. And so the story closed not with a celebration nor with despair, but with a lesson that echoed far beyond Cleveland. That loyalty is not blind obedience, but courage. That justice is not ceremony, but truth. And that sometimes the weight of a city can rest on the shoulders of one woman who refuses to bow. My dear friends, if you've stayed with me until the very last moments, surely your heart has gone through a whirlwind of emotions: surprise, anger, compassion, even a lump in your throat at the choice made by the black female police officer. What do you think about her action? Was it admirable courage or a risky recklessness? If you were in her place, what would you do? Leave your comment below. If you believe that justice must be protected by the truth, press 1. If you feel there are still mysteries left unsolved, press 0. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you too will always stand on the side of justice, even though the path to the truth is never easy.